This is Dr. Supreet from Department of Commerce. So today we will be discussing about the income under the head PGBP, which is our profits and gains of business and profession. Since we have already covered the salaries, we have covered the capital gains, house property. So this is our fourth pillar of income tax, which is our profits and gains of business and profession. So since we are talking about the profits and gains of business and profession, so there stands our basis of charge for the same. So there is a charging section for our PGBP, that is our section number 28. Since when we talk about this basis of charge, that means that these are the few things that are to be kept in mind while we are determining the income under the head PGBP. So the first very point that comes into the picture is our profits and gains derived from business and profession. That means what is, when we are talking about that any income is chargeable under the head PGBP, that means that income has to be derived from any business or profession. That means if there being any other income which generates from your salaries, then it will not be taxable under the head PGBP. It has to be from some business activity or some professional activities. Then we talk about that there is any interest, any bonus or commission, or let's say any salaries that we pay off to the partners, that also comes under the purview of our PGBP. Similarly, if any person is generating any income from any activity which is related to your commercial activity or which is related to trade, that means buying and selling of goods and services. So that means what? That means the activity is somehow centric towards the business activity. It is centric towards the commercial activity. So such activities, when it results into any sort of your income, so income from your trade or commercial activity which is connected with your business will be taxable under the head income from PGBP. Similarly, any sum, any amount of your income, any amount of your profits, right, any speculative transactions that you are generating any sort of your sum or income from such specific, you could say, speculative transactions. So that will also be taxable under the head your PGBP. Now, there's another one important point, that is with respect to our keyman insurance policy. Now, what is the keyman insurance policy? It is basically an insurance policy which is taken by a firm or a company for its key employees. That means those employees which greatly impact the functioning of an organization. So company does what is, it takes a keyman insurance policy for the same. So whatever amount of sum that is received under this keyman insurance policy, that will be taxable under our head income from PGBP. So when we talk about this basis of charge under our charging section 28, we talks about any activity which is centering around our, you could say, business, our profession, whether it is in the form of any interest, our bonus, commission, or even a salary to the partners, right? So that means what? That those incomes will be taxable or chargeable under the head income from PGBP. Similarly, when we talk about PGBP, there stands some conceptual understanding of certain, you could say, definitions. For example, let's say we talk about business. So when we talk about business in terms of your PGBP, then it means that business means any trade, any activity that is taken by a person for the with the intent of, you could say, making profits. So here the person who is undertaking any sort of your activity which is a commerce activity or a related to any trade, that means buying and selling of your goods and services, and the intent behind such activities is not just a one time activity, it is basically for the furtherance of business. So you buying any, you could say, a car or selling any car for one single transaction does not entails to a business transaction or any transaction that yields into your income from the head PGBP. For that, there should be an intent for the furtherance of business, right? For example, let's say any person dealing up into the sale and purchase of second hand, let's say cars, bikes, any other vehicular, right? So that person intent is for the furtherance of the business, that this is not a one time activity that is being taken by the vendor. It is an activity which is recurring into nature. He is continuously involved into the sale and the purchase of the let's say the cars, bicycles, or motorcycles. So that means that person is into a commercial activity. That person is there into a trade, which is your buying and selling of your goods, or let's say the services, and the intent behind the same is the furtherance of the business. Now when we talk about business, because business, since it's an economic activity, so the entire intent is, or you could say the major motive is your profit. Every business, it takes certain economic activities with an intent to generate profits, right? Now similarly, when we talk about some concepts regards to our PGBP, there is another point which says that there are certain incomes that are not to be included into PGBP. So that means exclusively, that means they are not to be taken up under this head of PGBP. Rather, it will go under some other heads. For example, when we talked about the salaries, we talked about any income that is being generated from your salaries will be taxable under the head, salaries, income under head salaries. Similarly, when we talked about any revenues that you are generating from the, renting of your property, right? Any residential property, so we were saying that it will be taxable under the head your house property. Similarly, any rental income of a person who is a dealer into a property, right? In that case, that rental income of a person who is dealing out into the property, since that is his business, so in that case you could say ki, that will be considered, right? So similarly, you could say the winnings from lotteries. So when we are talking about the winnings from the lotteries, it will be taxable exclusively under the head other sources. So जब भी हम बात करते हैं, we are drawing any sort of your, you could say, benefits or the winnings you are generating from any lottery scheme, right? So those winnings, any sort of your dividend that you are generating, that will be taxable under the head your other sources. Similarly, when we talk about these business activities, or we talk about these commercial activities, we have to be very careful that the transaction, it has to take place into the relevant previous year. So when we are talking about that the person or the SAC should carry on the business or the profession, then one another important point is that the transaction must be related to the relevant previous year. That means if the transaction is related to business and profession, but it is not related to the relevant previous year, right, for which the income is being taxable, then it will not be taxable into that particular assessment year. So that transaction must happen at the related relevant previous year, right? Now when we are talking about these business concepts, the basic section charging, now another important thing that is to be kept into mind when we are talking about the PGBP, there stands a format as it did stand into your capital gains, as it did stand into your house property and your salaries. Similarly, in case of your PGBP, there is a very standard, you could say, format for the computation of your income under the head PGBP. So we say, in case you how it would be computed, will start from whatever be your net profits as per your P&L account. So whatever net profits you are generating from your P&L account, will do certain adjustments into the same. Now what will be the adjustments regarding? These adjustments will be regarding those expenses which may be or were allowed to you, but you have not recorded or not made an entry with respect to the same. Now you will do what is, you'll mention whatever your net profits are there as per your P&L account, and from the same, in case you were having any expenses which were allowed under the act, but you have not recorded the same, that means you have not made a corresponding entry for the expenses which were there with respect to the business activities. So if not recorded earlier, then you can record it right now. So that means from your net profit, since it's an expenditure, it will get deductible, right? So those expenses which were allowed but you have not recorded the same, they will get deductible from your net profits. Similarly, it may happen that you had certain expenses which were disallowed, but you have done what is, you have taken a benefit for the same. So if there have been any expenses which are disallowed, right, and you have already taken a benefit of the same, then they are to be added back. So you have to reverse all those expenditures which were not allowed. Similarly, if there have been any income which is not covered under this head but you have already added the same, then that income will be you could say deducted back, right, because you have already inflated the income. Supposingly it has to go under the head other sources, right, but by default or by any omission, you have done what is, you have included that income under the head your PGBP, so pass a reverse entry for the same. Similarly, it says income which is covered under the PGBP but you have not recorded the same. So if you have sort of deflated any income of yours, so you can just add it back, you can record it now, so that will get added into the same. So after making the adjustments with respect to these expenses in the income, you will get what is your income under the head profits and gains of business and profession, right. So you have to make these adjustments in case any entries are skipped by you, or in case any expenditures were allowed but you have not recorded the same. Similarly, any income being covered but you have not recorded the same, so those you could say adjustments you are supposed to do. Similarly, when we talk about this PGBP, now there are certain sections which talks about the expenses which are allowed as the deduction under PGBP and the expenses which are totally not allowed as your expenses which are deductible under the head PGBP. So one by one we'll be discussing about all those sections, right. First we'll be talking about those sections which are allowed for deduction under the head PGBP. So these are your sections from 30 to 37. So section 30 to 37, it prima facie it deals with you could say those expenses which are allowed as deduction under the head PGBP. So starting up with section 30. Section 30 says that if in case you are using any building, right, using in terms of you are paying a rent for that particular building, right. If you are using any building for the purpose of your business, right, for the purpose of conducting any, you could say, commerce or trade activity, then whatever amount of your rent, your repairs, insurance, taxes corresponding to the same will be allowed as a deduction. That means जितना भी आपका income होगा under the head PGBP, you will be allowed a deduction under section 30 with respect to the rental expenses, with respect to your insurance expenses or the taxes which were there with respect to the building, right. But the thing is that the building should be used for the business purpose, right. Then only the expenses will be allowed as the deduction under the head PGBP. Next is your section 31. Now what is the section 31? It says if any machinery, let us say any plant, machinery, any furnitures which you are using for the business purposes, then any expenditure which is related to this particular machinery, it will be allowed as deduction. Now when we talk about any expenditures, now those expenditures means, let's say, any repairs that I am incurring with respect to your plant and machinery, any you could say insurance that you are incurring with respect to the machinery, or you could say the furniture. So those will be you could say allowed as deduction if it is related to your business, right. If it is related to the business, those expenses will be totally allowed, right. Now the important section comes into the picture, that is your section 32. That is the most important segment. Now, since we are talking about the depreciation allowance, so when we are talking about this depreciation allowance, there are certain conditions which are given under this section 32, which says when we are talking about this depreciation allowance, the asset it must be owned by the assessee. That means जिस asset के respect में आप depreciation allowance claim करना चाहते हैं, that asset must be owned by the assessee. वो asset assessee का ही हो, उसने उसे rental पर lease पर नहीं लिया होना चाहिए. Second to that particular asset should be used for the purpose of business or profession. कि जिस एसेट की आप बात कर रहे हैं वो एसेट को जो है आप बिजनेस या फिर प्रोफेशन के लिए यूज करें, ठीक है. देन इट शुड बी यूज्ड ड्यूरिंग द रेलेवेंट प्रीवियस ईयर. यानी कि जिस एसेट से रिस्पेक्ट में आप डेप्रिसिएशन क्लेम कर रहे हैं तो वो जो एसेट है आपका वो उस रेलेवेंट प्रीवियस ईयर में यूज होना चाहिए. अगर आप उस रेलेवेंट प्रीवियस ईयर में उस एसेट को यूज नहीं कर रहे हैं, then you cannot claim a depreciation allowance for the same, right? Similarly, depreciation is available whether the asset is a tangible asset or it's an intangible asset, right? Your benefit of depreciation is altogether available. Similarly, when we talk about this depreciation allowance now, we talk about one important term, that is your block of assets. Now, when we are talking about this block of assets, that means all those assets which are having a same rate of depreciation, they will be taken up as the one unit. That means what? कि जितने भी आपके assets हैं, asset A, asset B, C, D or E, if they are having a same rate of depreciation, they will be considered as one block of asset. That means what? कि अगर जितने भी एसेट सेम रेट पर चलेंगे हम उन्हें कहेंगे ये एक सिंगल ब्लॉक है. सिमिलरली 10% वाले को हमने अलग कर दिया, 15% वाले ब्लॉक को अलग कर दिया एंड सिमिलरली 20% वाले ब्लॉक को हमने अलग कर दिया. सो दैट मीन्स वी आर मेकिंग व्हाट, वी आर हैविंग अ ब्लॉक ऑफ एसेट्स. नाउ जब हम डेप्रिसिएशन अलाउंस की बात करें, इट इज बेसिकली अलाउड ओनली onto 4 sorts of your assets, which is your building, which is the furniture, plant and machinery and intangibles. Now we have different rates which are available for our building, which are available for our furniture, plant and machinery and intangibles. So broadly we have these 4 categories: building, furniture, plant and machinery and intangibles, right? Further we have the different segments wherein the rates differ. For example, let's say the building. If building is used for the residential purpose, the rate of depreciation will be 5%. If the building is used for commercial purpose, then the rate increases to 10%. Similarly, if the building is related to your, let's say, any temporary erections that you are doing into, right, a building, for example, any wooden construction, so that ways any such building, right, which is a sort of a temporary shelter, right, temporary erection, so that could be your rate of depreciation would be somehow around 40%. Similarly, for furniture it is 10%, for the intangibles it's 25%, right? And when we talk about the plant and machinery, if your plant and machinery is being used for the pollution control, computers, books, airplanes, so into all these categories your rate of depreciation would be 40%. And if it is a car, right, a normal car, then the rate of depreciation will be 15%. If it is any other car, taxi or a bus which is taken up on a hire, so then the rate enhances to 30%. And in case it is a motor, bus or a car which is used in a business of you could say in such business where they are kept on to hire, but they are acquired after your 23rd of August 2019 and they have been put to use before the 1st of April 2020, then the rate of your depreciation is 45%, right? Now these were the rates that were given to us for, you could say, computing the depreciation allowance. But always keep into mind that one thing, that this depreciation allowance is always allowed as per your written down value method, right? You are not taking any SLM method for the same, you are taking a written down value method for the same. There are other certain things that are to be kept into mind when we are talking about depreciation allowance, right? For example, when the asset is being acquired, when it will be put to use, so what will be the treatment for the same. So we'll be talking about these further different you could say concepts in depth in the next very segment. So thank you for the day.